Well, amongst the PM's defenders is Michael Fabricant, the Conservative MP for Lichfield. Good morning.
Good morning, Borodah.
Is it your sense that a confidence vote is more or less inevitable sometime between now and the summer?
Well, nothing is ever inevitable. And I remember a long time when people thought there would be a vote of confidence in Theresa May. And when it did happen, it didn't happen at the right time for those people who were voting no confidence. We'll just have to see, I think. It's certainly getting near the mark, I would imagine. But as you quite rightly said in your introduction, only Sir Graham Brady and possibly his secretary, the chairman of the 1922 committee, will actually know the numbers.
I was just going to bring up something with you. You got into a spot of bother a few weeks ago, and you got out of it fairly easily by fezzing up and apologising about it. Why do you think the Prime Minister finds it so difficult to do that?
I had to apologise twice, by the way. First of all, because I'd given the implication that the majority of nurses and doctors had broken rules. Not that I was condemning them, incidentally. No one was suggesting they were drunk or anything like that, but just that they were relaxing. It wasn't a majority. It was a minority. But the second apology was to all the whistleblowers who had contacted me, who were telling me examples of when this had happened. But anyway, let's not progress that. Look, I think that the Prime Minister has apologised many, many times in the chamber. And he's been very, very clear about this. In fact, at the last 1922, somebody stood up and said, will you stop apologising?
The trouble is, though, that it appears to me the public aren't buying that apology. And, you know, the reason for that is, I don't know, it's just his manner. I mean, there was a classic example of it, and I think it was the response to the Sue Gray report, where he sort of said, oh, yes, I'm sorry. And then a few seconds later, he was making some weak gag about calling the Leader of the Opposition Sabir Korma, and the look on Dominic Raab's face said it all. You know, why are you doing this? You know, why can't you just apologise seriously and leave it at that?
It's his nature. He is an ebullient person. That's why I like him so much. In many ways, he's quite similar to me in that respect. It's very, very difficult for him to actually, you know, be sombre, shall we say. And in a way, it's that sort of original thinking, or that sort of seeing a glass half full rather than half empty, which makes him what he is. And that was why, for example, you know, he didn't go with the European vaccine scheme. And that's why we did do it alone ourselves. And so many other things. What we've done in Ukraine, so far ahead of all the other countries in the world in providing assistance. But that is his nature. To me, I find that quite attractive.
But you see, here's the problem. For a lot of people, the most shocking thing in the Sue Gray report wasn't anything about the attack by cake or the garden parties. It was the treatment of the security staff and the cleaners. And it painted a picture in a lot of people's head of the sort of entitled young people who think they can get away with anything.
Well, I agree with that. I agree with that assessment, actually. But so was Boris Johnson. Don't forget, most of this occurred on a Friday.
Why haven't they been sacked? That's the question. Because it would be easy enough to identify them, because we know Boris Johnson has apologised to the people who were insulted. Well, if he knows who was insulted, he knows who was doing the insulting. So why weren't those people marched out of Number 10 with their Tesco carrier bags and told they'd never work for the public service again?
Well, I believe some of them have been, actually. Look, all this happened on a Friday night, and Boris would have been long gone. You know, normally he leaves on a Friday morning to Chequers.
I'm not suggesting for a moment that he was there, but the moment he found out about that, the mistreatment of some pretty poorly paid staff, the people who did that should have been sacked on the spot, shouldn't they?
Yeah, I agree. There was appalling behaviour. And as I say, Boris Johnson was very, very upset about it because he didn't really know about this. This was all in his absence on Fridays and sometimes at weekends as well. You're absolutely right. Some of these people did behave in an appalling, entitled, sort of, you know, irresponsible way, young graduates and all the rest of it. Many of them have gone. I don't know which ones have gone, which ones are staying. But the worst offenders, as far as I know, actually have been given their marching orders.
You see, the problem I think people feel is that, the Prime Minister is the equivalent of the 15-year-old schoolboy who apologises to the head and then goes out and tells his mates he's got away with it, that he doesn't actually think he's done anything wrong. And another example of that is why this refusal to introduce what virtually every other workplace has in Britain, which is an alcohol policy. And those policies are easy to write. Staff aren't allowed to bring alcohol into the building. If alcohol's served, it's served at a pre-arranged event, which has a start time and end time and someone supervising it. What's so special about Downing Street and Boris Johnson that he can't introduce that policy?
Well, it's interesting what you say, because I know some government departments, or certainly they did, maybe I'm out of date now, you could get wine, and it was available, and beer and whatever, and it was available.
Oh, sure. Look, 30 years ago in the BBC, every manager had a cocktail cabinet. I'm not saying, that was the culture at the time. But the culture of the 21st century isn't that. So why does Downing Street think it can have the culture of the 1980s?
Well, it's been like that for a long time. It happened under Tony Blair. It happened under subsequent prime ministers, and probably without Tony Blair's knowledge. But, they work very long hours. It's not a 9-to-5 job. I'm trying to sort of...
Well, wine o'clock is 4:30. So, it's not 9 to 5. It's 9 to 4:30.
Where do you get the 4:30 from?
Well, that's on the record. That is wine o'clock in Downing Street. On a Friday.
Well, on a Friday, and this was when the Prime Minister wasn't there. And look, the civil servants, you talk about someone saying, oh, we got away with it. That wasn't the Prime Minister. That was the head of the civil service in the area, the one who invited people, bring your own bottle. And this is why I'm defending Boris, really. I just feel it's so unfair. I hate injustice. And he is getting blamed for a culture that existed with senior civil servants that he couldn't possibly have known about because prime ministers aren't there. And of course, as I pointed out before, there are something like 300 offices in Downing Street. There's almost 800 people working there. The Prime Minister's not in charge of the civil servants. The senior civil servant is.
Hang on a sec, because Boris Johnson made this point of, I can't remember how many thousand square yards or metres, whichever he said, imperial or metric, Downing Street.
50,000 square feet, I worked it out as, in square feet. I don't know square metres well.
But if you look at where the various parties took place, they all took place in the same corner of the building. And it's a corner of the building that he knows very well. These weren't hidden away in the attic.
But they happened on a Friday, mostly, when he wasn't there. That's the whole point. And you had the civil servants inviting people along. And that's why I think there's this huge injustice. He couldn't possibly have known what was going on. Certainly the culture was wrong. What has he done? He's changed the culture totally by creating an office of Prime Minister, which was an idea first mooted by Tony Blair, but wasn't put into action.
But no alcohol policy. No alcohol policy.
Well, hang on, Vaughan, where you've got the permanent secretary there in place. And presumably now there will be a no alcohol policy. But look, someone at the 1922, and the 1922, I'll just repeat for your listeners, is the sort of committee of all the Conservative MPs. It's our sort of trade union. Someone said we should have a no alcohol policy at the House of Commons. And that went down like a lead glider, I can tell you. And it's because of the hours, And by the way, I do remember the BBC club. It wasn't just the cabinets. I mean, there was a wonderful BBC club at Broadcasting House in London, in the Langham Hotel. And, don't know, about 4:30, but by 9 p.m, there was barely a sober person in the place.
I would not attempt to deny that for a minute. Let me put one final point to you. We hear often this phrase priced in, that the electors look at Boris Johnson and they've priced in his bad behaviour, his mistakes, because they respect him for other things. He got Brexit done. He got all these anti-tank weapons to Ukraine, as you say, and people say it's priced in. But there's another group of the electorate, it strikes me, where that bad behaviour is priced in such a way as they will never vote for the Conservatives while they're led by Boris Johnson. It's a different group of people, and I accept there's people on the other side as well. But they're people, if you like, people you would call salt-of-the-earth Tories, people across the south of England for whom standards matter. They're the sort of people who run charity shops, who've been organising their Jubilee Street parties over this weekend. A particular kind of Tory finds this behaviour just unconscionable.
No, that's right. I wouldn't argue with that. I mean, I know some people in Lichfield who are members of the Conservative Association and feel exactly the way that you've described. And a friend of mine who was standing in the crowds to see the people arrive, the royal family arrive at St. Paul's, did hear some booing, not quite as much as people have made out, but some booing. And he told me one was a little old lady who come up from Dorset because she's a royalist, and started booing because she thought exactly the way you thought. And why am I defending Boris? Because, as I say, I think it's misplaced, the anger, because so much of what went on, so much of what was unforgivable, some of that arrogance that you talked about where people abused security staff and cleaners. And incidentally, I know that Boris got up the following morning at 6 a.m. to thank the shift of cleaners who he couldn't thank that afternoon and apologise to on behalf of these other people. But so much of this happened without his knowledge. And it couldn't be in his knowledge because it happened when he wasn't there. And just like I sort of stood up in Parliament and called out John Bercow, the Speaker, for being a bully, because I can't stand bullies, I also can't stand injustice. And yeah, Boris doesn't help himself, as you said earlier on, by making light sometimes of other situations. But you know what? He is not the person I think that people should be directing their anger at. And he has changed the very manner in which number 10 Downing Street now operates.